The observation station floated in the cold darkness between Neptune and Pluto, so far from Earth that the sun looked like nothing more than a bright star among millions of others. The station had been there for 27 years, hidden behind a small moon that humans had not yet discovered. Inside, creatures that looked nothing like humans watched screens and studied data that their machines collected from the inner solar system. Observer First Class N adjusted his forearms on the control panel and let out a sound that was something between a sigh and a whistle. His skin, which was almost see-through and showed the blue blood moving through his veins, changed color to show his boredom. After 6 years of watching the humans, he had grown tired of his assignment. "Another day of watching the primitives," he said to his partner, Observer Second Class, who sat at the station next to him. "They launched another probe today. It will take them 11 months to reach their 4th planet. 11 months. Can you imagine being trapped in a metal box for 11 months just to travel to a neighboring world?" Made a clicking sound with her mouth parts that showed she found this funny. "I watched a broadcast from their planet yesterday. They were celebrating because they built a new fusion reactor. They acted like they had invented fire for the first time. Meanwhile, our children's toys use more advanced power sources. What do you expect from a species that still fights wars over lines drawn on maps?" And pulled up a display showing Earth. The blue and green world hung in space, covered with swirls of white clouds. It was a beautiful planet, he admitted to himself. Too bad it was wasted on such a primitive species. "They have been aware of our presence in the galaxy for 30 years now. 30 years, and they still cannot build a ship that can travel faster than light. They are hopeless." The door to the observation room slid open, and Station Commander Al entered. He was old his skin having lost much of its ability to show color and now stuck in a pale gray tone. But his mind was still sharp, and his 4 eyes still saw everything that happened on his station. "Observers," he said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent too many years doing a job he found beneath him. "What is the status of the human?" N straightened in his seat. "Nothing of importance, Commander. They launched a probe to their 4th planet. They continue to broadcast entertainment signals into space without any encryption. And they had another small conflict in the southern region of their largest continent. 47 of them died." 47, Al made a sound of disbelief. "They killed each other over what? Resources, territory?" "It appears to be about religious differences, Commander." Al's skin flickered with colors of contempt. "Religious differences. They murder each other because they disagree about which invisible being controls the universe. And these are the creatures who sent messages asking to join the Galactic Conclave. The High Arbiter will be amused when he receives our next report." Turned from her station. "Commander, there is one item of note. The humans have increased their activity around their 6th planet. They appear to be building something in orbit around one of its moons." "Building what?" "Unknown. They are using heavy construction vessels and have established a security perimeter. Our long-range sensors cannot penetrate their interference field." Al waved one of his 4 hands dismissively. "Probably another mining operation. The humans have been trying to extract resources from their outer system for decades. Let them play with their rocks. It keeps them busy and away from our territory." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "Continue your observations. The High Arbiter wants a comprehensive report before the next conclave meeting. He plans to use the humans as an example of why the conclave's expansion restrictions are necessary. We cannot have primitives spreading through the galaxy like a disease." After the commander left N and exchanged looks, N's skin showed colors of dark amusement. "A disease," he repeated. "That is exactly what they are. Have you seen the projections? If we had not established the boundary around their system, they would have attempted to colonize at least 3 other star systems by now. Can you imagine? Humans spreading their chaos and violence to other worlds." "It would have been a disaster," agreed. "The Conclave was right to contain them. Perhaps in a few thousand years, when they have evolved beyond their primitive impulses, they can be reconsidered for membership. A few thousand years. You are optimistic. I give them 500 years before they destroy themselves. They came very close during what they called the Cold War, and again during the Resource Wars. They are their own worst enemy. On the screens in front of them, Earth continued to turn, unaware that it was being watched, unaware that it had been judged and found unworthy. Far away, in a building that humans called the United Nations Space Command Headquarters, Admiral Grace was very aware of both of these things. The room was deep underground, beneath the streets of Geneva, protected by layers of concrete and steel and electronic countermeasures that had cost trillions of dollars to develop. Only 12 people in the entire world knew this room existed. Only 7 had ever been inside it. Grace stood at the head of a long table made of dark wood, looking at the 6 other people who had gathered for this meeting. They represented the most powerful nations on Earth, but in this room there were no flags, no national interests, no political games. In this room they were simply humans, facing a threat that made their differences seem meaningless. "Ladies and," Grace said, her voice steady and calm despite the anger that burned in her chest, "I have called this meeting because we have intercepted a transmission that you all need to hear." She pressed a button on the table, and a holographic display appeared in the center of the room. It showed a creature with 4 arms and translucent skin standing before a vast assembly of alien beings. The chamber was enormous, with thousands of representatives from dozens of species, and the creature was speaking with obvious contempt. "They call themselves humanity," the creature said, and the translation software converted his words into English. "They have barely mastered fusion propulsion. Their fastest vessels take months to reach their neighboring planets, and yet they speak of joining the galactic community. Perhaps we should invite the bacteria in our waste filtration systems as well. They would be equally qualified." The chamber in the recording erupted in various sounds of alien laughter. Clicks, whistles, rumbles, and other noises that the human ear could barely process. They were all laughing at humanity. They were all mocking the species that had split the atom, walked on the moon, and cured diseases that had once killed millions. Grace let the recording play for another minute, showing more speakers rising to add their own insults, their own jokes, their own dismissive comments about the primitive humans trapped in their tiny solar system. Then she turned it off. The room was silent. The 6 other people at the table all wore expressions of shock, anger, and humiliation. Secretary General of Brazil had gone pale. General of Japan was gripping the arms of her chair so hard that her knuckles had turned white. Admiral Christopher Blake of the United States had his jaw clenched so tight that a muscle in his cheek was twitching. "How long have they been watching us?" asked Minister of Defense of Russia, his voice barely above a whisper. 27 years that we know of," Grace replied. "Possibly longer. They have observation stations scattered throughout the outer solar system. We have detected at least 14, but there may be more." "And they have been blocking our expansion," said General Wei of China. "It was not a question. The equipment failures on our Mars colony, the mysterious accidents that destroyed our outer system probes, the explosion that killed 300 people on the Europa mining platform. We believe so, yes. They want to keep us contained. They see us as a threat, but not the kind of threat that requires military action. We are more like an infestation that needs to be controlled. They destroy our equipment, sabotage our missions, and laugh about it among themselves." "This is an act of war," Admiral Blake said, his voice hard with barely contained rage. "They have killed our people. They have deliberately prevented our expansion into space. Under any reasonable interpretation of international law, this is an act of war." "International law does not apply to them," Grace replied. "Galactic law does, and according to galactic law, primitive species like us have no rights. We are not recognized as sentient beings by the Galactic Conclave. We are classified as a pre-contact civilization, which means they can do whatever they want to us without consequence. Minister slammed his fist on the table. Then we make them recognize us. We build weapons. We show them that we are not to be dismissed. With what? General asked, her voice bitter. Our fastest ships take months to cross our own solar system. Their slowest ships can travel between stars in days. Their weapons can destroy planets. Ours can barely scratch the paint on their hulls. We tried to fight back once, remember, the battle over Europa. We sent 12 of our best warships against a single patrol vessel. The battle lasted 4 minutes. We lost all 12 ships. They did not even have to use their main weapons. They swatted us aside like insects. So what do you suggest? Demanded. That we surrender, that we accept our place as bacteria in their filtration systems. I suggest nothing of the kind, Grace said, and something in her voice made everyone at the table turn to look at her. I suggest that we do what humans have always done when faced with a superior enemy. We adapt. We innovate. We find their weaknesses and exploit them. And most importantly, we do it in secret so they do not see us coming until it is too late. She pressed another button on the table, and the holographic display changed. It now showed technical specifications, blueprints, and three-dimensional models of something that none of them had ever seen before. Ladies, and I present to you the Horizon Project. For the next 2 hours, Grace explained what had been happening in the facilities hidden beneath the surface of the moon. For 17 years, the greatest scientific minds on Earth had been working on a single goal: creating a ship that could travel between stars without being detected by sensors. The key was something called metamaterial technology. Human scientists had discovered that by arranging atoms in certain patterns, they could create materials that bent light and other forms of radiation in impossible ways. Materials that could make objects invisible. Materials that could absorb sensor readings and project false data back to the source. Materials that, when properly configured, could make a ship disappear from every known detection system in the galaxy. They had been watching human technology for nearly 3 decades. They knew about human fusion reactors, human propulsion systems, human weapons, and human computers. But they had missed the metamaterial research because it had been classified at the highest possible level and conducted in facilities that even most Earth governments did not know existed. We call it the Shroud, Grace said, showing them a simulation of how the technology worked. When activated, it creates a field around the ship that absorbs all incoming radiation and projects false readings back to the source. To sensors, the ship simply does not exist. It becomes a ghost. This is remarkable, said Secretary General, leaning forward to study the blueprints. But can you build a ship large enough to be useful? Can you make it work in practice, not just in theory? Grace smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator that had been waiting patiently for its prey to come within reach. We already have. The ship is called the Silent Dawn. It has been completed for 3 months. It has passed all tests, and it is ready for deployment. The room fell silent again, as the weight of her words sank in. You are talking about an attack, General said slowly. You want to send this ship to the... Not an attack, Grace corrected. A demonstration. We are going to show them that we are not the primitive creatures they think we are. We are going to appear above their capital city without warning, proving that we can reach them whenever we want. And then we are going to deliver a message. What kind of message? Admiral Blake asked. The kind that cannot be ignored. The kind that changes everything. The kind that makes them understand that humanity is not a disease to be contained. We are a species to be respected, and if they refuse to give us that respect, we will take it from them. The discussion continued for several more hours. There were objections, concerns, and questions about the risks. What if the Shroud technology failed? What if they detected the ship despite their precautions? What if they responded to this demonstration with overwhelming force, destroying Earth in retaliation. Grace had answers for all of these concerns. The Shroud technology had been tested hundreds of times. They had no reason to expect an attack from a species they considered primitive. And if they did respond with force, well, humanity was already living under their thumb. At least this way, they would go down fighting rather than living as servants. By the end of the meeting, all 7 people at the table had agreed. The mission would proceed. Captain would command the Silent Dawn. And in 18 days, if everything went according to plan, the galaxy would learn that humanity was not to be mocked. 3 days after the meeting in Geneva, High Arbiter stood on the balcony of his residence on Prime, looking out at the city that bore his name. Was a masterpiece of architecture, with towers that stretched toward the clouds and structures that seemed to defy gravity. The city had stood for 8,000 years, growing and evolving with each generation, until it covered an entire continent. He was the ruler of this city, this world, and in many ways the entire galaxy. The Galactic Conclave technically operated on principles of equality and consensus, but everyone knew that they held the real power. They had been traveling between stars when most other species were still learning to make fire. They had built the communication networks that connected the galaxy. They had written the laws that governed interstellar relations. And they had the largest and most advanced military force in known space. And was proud of his people's achievements. He was proud of his own achievements. Under his leadership, the Conclave had expanded to include 47 species. Trade routes had been established that brought prosperity to hundreds of worlds. Conflicts had been resolved through diplomacy rather than violence. It was a golden age, and he was at the center of it. But there were always problems to deal with, always minor irritations that demanded his attention. And lately, the biggest irritation was a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable yellow star on the outer edge of the galaxy. His aide, a young named Al, entered the balcony with a data tablet. High Arbiter, the latest report from the Human Observation Network has arrived. And did not turn from the view. Summarize it for me. The humans continue to expand within their solar system despite our containment efforts. They have established a new settlement on the 4th planet and are building structures around the moon of their 6th planet. Our field operatives have sabotaged several of their missions, but they continue to rebuild and try again. Persistent creatures, and admitted, I will give them that much, like insects that keep crawling no matter how many times you step on them. There is one item of concern, High Arbiter. The facility they are building near the 6th planet is heavily shielded. Our long-range sensors cannot determine its purpose. And finally turned to look at his aide. Should I be worried? Al's skin flickered with colors of uncertainty. Our analysts do not believe so. The humans lack the theoretical knowledge to develop any technology that would pose a threat to us. They are probably building another mining operation or research station. However, some on the council have suggested that we send a patrol vessel to investigate more closely and risk provoking them, and made a sound of dismissal. The humans are emotional creatures. If we move into their inner system, they will see it as aggression. They will unite against us instead of fighting among themselves. No, let them build their little station. Let them play with their primitive toys. As long as they stay within their boundaries, they are not our concern. As you wish, High Arbiter. After Al left, and remained on the balcony for a long time thinking about the humans, they were a puzzling species. In some ways, they showed remarkable potential. Their art was creative and emotional in ways that most species could not match. Their scientific progress, while slow by galactic standards, was steady and determined, and their ability to adapt to different environments was impressive for such a young species. But they were also violent, irrational, and self-destructive. They fought wars over resources they could easily share. They divided themselves into groups based on the color of their skin, the language they spoke, and the beliefs they held. They had come close to destroying themselves with nuclear weapons not once but twice in their short history. Perhaps in a few thousand years, they would evolve beyond these primitive impulses. Perhaps they would learn to work together, to share resources, to resolve conflicts without violence. And when that day came, the conclave might reconsider their application for membership. But that day was far in the future. For now, the humans were exactly what he had called them in his speech to the conclave: bacteria. Interesting to study, occasionally useful, but ultimately irrelevant to the greater concerns of the galaxy. And went back inside his residence, never suspecting that in less than 3 weeks, everything he believed about the humans would be proven wrong. The city of Houston had changed a great deal in the last 50 years. Where there had once been sprawling suburbs and endless highways, there were now efficient public transit systems and vertical farms that fed millions of people. The old oil refineries had been torn down and replaced with fusion power plants that provided clean energy for the entire region. And the Johnson Space Center, once the crown jewel of American space exploration, had been transformed into something far more ambitious. Admiral Grace walked through the corridors of the center, passing walls covered with photographs and displays that documented humanity's journey into space. There were images of the first moon landing, the first Mars colony, the first successful fusion-powered spacecraft. There were memorials to those who had died in the pursuit of the stars, the crews of the shuttles and rockets that had exploded, the colonists who had perished in the harsh environments of other worlds, the 300 men and women who had been killed when they destroyed the Europa mining platform. That last memorial was the largest, covering an entire wall. Grace stopped in front of it, as she always did when she visited the center. She read the names, even though she had memorized them years ago. She touched the bronze plaque that listed the cause of death as equipment failure, even though everyone who had access to the classified files knew the truth. They had killed them, not because they posed a threat, but because they were in the way. Because the mining platform was extracting resources that they had decided belonged to them. Because humanity was not allowed to expand beyond the boundaries that their alien masters had set. Admiral. Grace turned to see a young officer standing behind her. He was tall and thin, with dark skin and serious eyes. His uniform identified him as a lieutenant commander in the Space Command. "Lieutenant Commander Brooks," she said, recognizing him from his file. "You are early." "I prefer to be early, Admiral. My father taught me that being late shows disrespect." Grace nodded approvingly. "Your father was a wise man. Walk with me." They continued down the corridor, past more memorials and displays, until they reached a door that was marked with a simple sign, "Authorized personnel only." Grace pressed her hand against a scanner, looked into a retinal identification device, and spoke her name and authorization code. The door slid open, revealing an elevator. "Where are we going, Admiral?" Daniel asked as they stepped inside. "Down, about half a kilometer down to be specific, to a place that does not officially exist." The elevator descended for nearly a minute before coming to a stop. The doors opened onto a large underground chamber that was filled with activity. Hundreds of technicians and engineers moved between workstations, reviewing data and making adjustments to equipment. Banks of computers lined the walls, their displays showing information that Daniel could not immediately understand. But what caught his attention, what made him stop and stare, was the massive window at the far end of the chamber. Through it, he could see into an even larger space, a construction bay that must have been carved out of solid rock beneath the city. And floating in that bay, held in place by magnetic fields and support structures, was the most incredible ship he had ever seen. It was black, so black that it seemed to absorb the light around it. Its hull was smooth and featureless, with no visible weapons, sensors, or propulsion systems. It was shaped like an elongated diamond, 2 kilometers long and nearly half a kilometer wide at its thickest point. And even though he was looking directly at it, Something about it made his eyes want to slide away, as if it was not entirely there. "The Silent Dawn," Grace said, coming to stand beside him. 17 years of work, trillions of dollars, the combined effort of every major nation on Earth, and it all comes down to this. "It's incredible," Daniel breathed. "I've never seen anything like it." "No one has, because nothing like it has ever existed." Grace turned to face him directly. "Lieutenant Commander Brooks, do you know why I asked you here today?" "I assumed it was for a briefing on the Horizon project. My security clearance was upgraded last week." "That is part of it, but there is something else, something personal." Grace paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your brother was assigned to the Europa platform, wasn't he?" Daniel's expression hardened. "Yes, Admiral. He was one of the 300 who died when the equipment failed." "Except the equipment didn't fail. You know that as well as I do." "Yes, Admiral, I know." "That knowledge has shaped your career. Every assignment you have accepted, every skill you have developed, every choice you have made for the last 15 years has been leading to this moment. You wanted to be here. You wanted to be part of whatever response humanity would eventually make." Daniel said nothing, but his eyes confirmed the truth of her words. "I am offering you a position on the Silent Dawn," Grace continued. "Commander of Tactical Operations. You would be responsible for the ship's weapons systems and defensive capabilities. If this mission goes wrong, if we have to fight our way out, you would be the one making the decisions that determine whether the crew lives or dies." "Why me?" "Because you have the skills, because you have the motivation, and because I need someone who understands what is at stake, someone who has a personal reason to see this mission succeed." Grace extended her hand. "What do you say, Commander Brooks? Are you ready to help humanity take its place among the stars?" Daniel looked at her hand, then at the ship floating in the construction bay. He thought about his brother, about the friends he had lost over the years, about all the humiliations and setbacks that humanity had suffered at the hands of their alien observers. He shook her hand firmly. "I'm ready, Admiral. When do we start?" On the far side of the solar system, Observer First Class N was finishing another routine shift when his sensors detected something unusual. It was just a flicker, a momentary disturbance in the quantum field readings that monitored space around the human. It lasted for less than a second and then disappeared. He ran a diagnostic on his equipment. Everything was functioning normally. He checked the readings again, but there was nothing there, just empty space and the usual background radiation. N made a note in his log, anomalous sensor reading detected at 14:27 local time. Duration, 0.7 seconds. No identifiable source. Likely equipment glitch, recommending routine maintenance. He did not think about it again. After all, the humans were primitives. What could they possibly do that would be worth worrying about? The answer to that question would come in 18 days, and it would change everything. Captain had spent his entire adult life preparing for command. He had graduated at the top of his class from the Space Command Academy. He had served on a dozen ships, working his way up from ensign to lieutenant to commander to captain. He had fought in the brief and disastrous battle over Europa, one of only 3 officers to survive the engagement, and he had spent the last 5 years training specifically for this mission. But as he walked through the corridors of the Silent Dawn for the first time, he felt something he had not experienced in years: uncertainty. The ship was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The corridors were wide and smooth, with gentle curves instead of sharp corners. The lighting came from panels embedded in the walls, adjusting automatically to the time of day and the activity of the crew. The air was fresh and clean, recycled through systems that were more advanced than anything on Earth's surface. And everywhere he looked, there were things he did not recognize. Panels covered with symbols that were not quite letters, not quite numbers. Screens displaying information in formats that seemed designed for minds that worked differently than his own. doors that opened before he reached them, as if the ship knew where he was going before he did. The Silent Dawn systems are partially based on reverse-engineered technology, explained Chief Engineer Laura Martinez as she led him through the ship. She was a small woman with dark hair and bright eyes, and she spoke with the enthusiasm of someone who truly loved her work. We captured some of their equipment during the Europa engagement. It took us years to figure out how it worked, but once we did, we were able to incorporate some of their design principles into our own technology. Is that safe? Asked, using their technology against them. It's not just their technology, it's a hybrid. We took what we learned from them and combined it with our own innovations. The Shroud system, for example, is entirely human in origin. They have nothing like it. Their sensors are designed to detect known technological signatures, and our metamaterial hull operates on principles they haven't discovered yet. They reached the bridge and stopped to take it in. The command center was circular, with workstations arranged in concentric rings around a central platform. The main was not a flat panel but a holographic display that filled most of the forward wall, showing a three-dimensional view of the space around the ship. Currently, it displayed the construction bay, but could imagine how it would look when they were in open space, surrounded by stars. "Your station, Captain." Laura gestured to the central platform, where a single chair waited. It was larger than the others, raised slightly above the rest of the bridge, with armrests that contained control interfaces. Climbed the 3 steps to the platform and stood before the chair. He did not sit down yet. Instead, he turned slowly, looking at each of the workstations, imagining the officers who would occupy them. "Navigation," Laura said, pointing to one station. "Sensors, communications, tactical, engineering, science, life support, and secondary stations for all of them in case we take casualties." "Casualties," said the word slowly, tasting it. "We need to be prepared for that possibility." "We are, Captain. But if the Shroud works the way it's supposed to, we shouldn't need to fire a single shot. We'll appear above Prime, deliver our message, and disappear again before they can respond." "And if the Shroud doesn't work?" Laura's expression grew serious. "Then we fight. The Silent Dawn carries weapons that are more advanced than anything else in the human fleet. We can't match a battleship in a straight fight, but we can hurt them. We can make them bleed. And maybe, if we're lucky, we can escape back to Earth to warn them about what's coming." Nodded. It was not the most reassuring answer, but it was honest. He appreciated that. "How long until we're ready to depart?" he asked. 3 days. We're loading the final supplies now, and the crew is completing their briefings. Admiral wants to address everyone before we launch." 3 days. Finally sat down in the command chair. It adjusted automatically to his body, supporting him in ways that made him feel like he could sit there for hours without discomfort. "Then let's make sure everything is perfect. I don't want any surprises once we're out there." The next 3 days were a blur of activity. Crew members arrived from all over the world, each one hand-picked for their skills and their commitment to the mission. Supplies were loaded, systems were tested, and drills were conducted until everyone knew their responsibilities perfectly. Met with each department head individually, learning about their sections and their concerns. Commander Daniel Brooks, the tactical officer, was intense and focused, still carrying the weight of his brother's death but channeling it into a cold determination. Lieutenant Amy, the communications officer, was young but brilliant, having developed new encryption methods that even the could not crack. Lieutenant Commander Peter, the navigator, was calm and methodical, exactly what you wanted from the person responsible for charting a course through the most dangerous mission in human history. And throughout it all, kept returning to the same question: was this really going to work? They had been watching humanity for decades. They had defeated human forces with casual ease. They controlled territory that spanned thousands of light years. Their technology was so advanced that it might as well be magic. And humanity was sending a single ship against them. One vessel, crewed by 800 people, carrying the hopes and fears of an entire species. It was either the bravest thing anyone had ever done, or the most foolish. Suppose they would find out which one soon enough. On the morning of the launch, Admiral Gray stood before the assembled crew of the Silent Dawn. They had gathered in the main cargo bay, the only space large enough to hold all 800 of them. They stood in neat rows, wearing their dress uniforms, their faces showing a mixture of pride, determination, and fear. Grace understood all of those emotions. She felt them herself. "You know why you're here," she began, her voice carrying easily through the bay. "You know what we're about to attempt, and you know the risks, so I'm not going to waste your time with speeches about duty and honor and sacrifice. You've heard all of that before." She paused, looking out at the faces before her. So young, many of them, so full of hope and anger and courage. "What I will tell you is this. For 30 years, the galaxy has looked at humanity and seen nothing but primitives. They have laughed at us, mocked us, dismissed us as irrelevant. They have blocked our expansion, destroyed our ships, and killed our people. And they have done all of this because they believed we were powerless to stop them." Her voice hardened. They were wrong. They underestimated us just as every enemy in human history has underestimated us. They saw our divisions and our conflicts and our failures, and they thought that was all we were capable of. They didn't see our resilience. They didn't see our determination. They didn't see the fire that burns in the heart of every human being, the refusal to surrender, the absolute rejection of defeat. She raised her hand, pointing toward the ceiling, toward the stars beyond. "Today, we show them who we really are. Today, we prove that humanity is not a disease to be contained, not an infestation to be controlled, not bacteria in their filtration systems. We are a species that has walked on the moon, split the atom, and cured diseases that once killed millions. We are dreamers and fighters and survivors, and we will not be mocked any longer." The crew erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the cargo bay. Grace let them cheer for a moment, then raised her hand for silence. "Captain will lead you on this mission. Trust him. Follow his orders. Work together. And remember that you are not just representing yourselves out there. You are representing every human being on Earth, every human who has ever lived, and every human who will ever be born. Make us proud." She stepped back and stepped forward to take her place. "You heard the Admiral. Now let's get to work. Report to your stations. We launch in 1 hour." The crew dispersed, moving with purpose and energy. Watched them go, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Grace came to stand beside him. "You're ready for this," she said quietly. "I wouldn't have chosen you if you weren't." "I know," turned to face her. "But there's something I need to ask. What happens if we succeed? What happens if we deliver our message and respond with diplomacy instead of war?" Grace's expression was unreadable. "Then humanity takes its first step into a larger universe. We join the galactic conclave as equals. We expand beyond our solar system. We become what we were always meant to be. And if they respond with war, then we fight. And we keep fighting until they understand that we will never surrender, never submit, never accept anything less than the respect we deserve." She put her hand on his shoulder. "Either way, nothing will ever be the same after today. The age of human isolation is ending. Whatever comes next, you and your crew will have made it possible." Nodded, there was nothing more to say. 1 hour later, the Silent Dawn rose from its construction bay, passed through the concealed doors that led to the surface, and climbed into the sky above Houston. The shroud was already active, bending light and radiation around the ship until it was invisible to any observer. Below, the city went about its business, unaware that history was being made above their heads. And in the observation station between Neptune and Pluto, N watched his screens and saw nothing unusual. Just another day in the primitive human system. Just another day of watching the bacteria go about their meaningless lives. He had no idea that everything was about to change.